I just want to say what an incredible honor it is, and just a personal pleasure for me to host Joy Thomas Moore and her son Wes Moore at Politics and Prose this evening. Neither of them is a stranger to the store. Joy was incredibly gracious to be on a panel for DC Reads, which is the city's attempt to pick one book and have the whole city read it and then discuss it. The book a few years ago happened to be Wes's first book, the other Wes Moore. And Nikki, Wes's sister and Joy's daughter, stepped in at the last minute to join the panel. So she was gracious enough to be on the panel with zero preparation. And of course, nobody knew that because she's, like all of these Moore people, incredibly brilliant and talented and gracious. So they've been here for that. Wes was here for his last book. When was that? A year or two ago? A couple years ago? No, 3 years ago?
3 years ago.
3 years ago for his book, The Work, which is kind of a sequel to the other Wes Moore in a way. Both, New York Times bestsellers. So, that's... But need I say more? But in any case, we're so thrilled to have Joy and Wes together tonight to help us with what I know will be an inspiring and informative discussion about Joy's new book, her first. Possibly not her last, though. You never know. It's called The Power of Presence, Be a Voice in Your Children's Ear Even When You're Not With Them. Now, as the title suggests, Joy writes that the power of presence is the secret sauce of parenting. And in this book, she explains that there are 7 pillars that she has outlined that are successful, that are sort of the keys to successful parenting. And we'll get to some of them later, but I just want to warn you that there is so much in this book that's fabulous. There are amazing stories of her own. There are amazing stories from other people. There are tidbits and prescriptions for how to think about being a parent, whether you're a single parent. Mostly it's geared towards single parents, but really I think it's universal to all parents. And we will only scratch the surface in the next amount of time we have. So I just want to say you have to read this book to get the full power of it, the full flavor of it. I will try my best to get us to some high points, and I know you both will too, but there's just a wealth of really resonant, wonderful information and stories and things from real life that I think will be very inspiring and important for you, whether you have kids, don't have kids, have grown kids, never want kids, whatever. You may change your mind, you never know. So if for the moment, think of whatever questions you might have for Joy and Wes, and we will hopefully get to your questions. But most importantly, I hope you will all read this book and both enjoy it as much as I did and also get as much out of it as I did. So before we dive in, I want to say a few background things about Joy. I know many of you know her, but for those who don't, she began her career in radio, television, and film. She won a Peabody Award. She's had Oscar nominations and Emmys along the way. She spent 15 years managing the media portfolio for the Annie E. Casey Foundation, which I think many of you know is a philanthropic organization devoted to bettering opportunities for disadvantaged children and families across our country. Today, she is president and CEO of JWS Media Consulting. Now, you probably know from that very brief roundup that she's very accomplished professionally, right? She's had a lot of success. But perhaps, I don't want to speak for you, but I would suspect that you think your greatest achievement has been in the personal realm. As a single mother raising 3 children in fairly roller coaster circumstances, which you will read about in the book. But for now, you do not have to look far to know how successful she's been as a single mother. You have the answer, actually you have 3 answers in this room. First, Nikki, her oldest daughter, right here. Shani, her youngest daughter, right here. I'm going to get to the third next. Actually, I'm going to have a few asterisks. Daughter-in-law Dawn back there, and James, grandson, James, and Mia is in there somewhere. Okay. And then answer number 3, or with the interlude of the little ones, is right here, Wes Moore. I have to do truth in advertising because, if you actually know the authors, you got to kind of fess up, right? So I first met Wes when he was 22 years old, and he was a senior at Johns Hopkins. And he was an academic star. He was an athletic talent. He was already a committed public servant. And then I heard this incredible story of how he had tragically lost his father when he was a young boy. And then he kind of lost his way in school and in life. And were it not thanks to the firm guidance of his mother and other mentors along the way, he possibly would not have got back on track. But he did get back on track, and he went on to all sorts of successes, which many of you know. Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford, where he studied international relations. He had a job in finance in London. And as he recounts in his second book, and as Joy recounts in her book, he became a captain in the U.S. Army and was deployed in combat in Afghanistan. He's been a White House fellow, a cable news commentator, co-founder of Bridge EDU, which helps kids transition not just to college, but to stay in college. And of course, today he serves as president of the Robin Hood Foundation, one of the most important organizations fighting poverty in America. As I mentioned, he is also a devoted husband to his wonderful, he found his equal. He found his equal. Found his equal in Dawn. And and a father to those two adorable, gorgeous, brilliant, wonderful, talented children. So, the best thing about all these people, I was just joking with my friend Valerie Strauss, who knows all of them. And we're like, it's just not fair. They're brilliant. They're incredibly talented. They're unbelievably gorgeous. And they're really nice. Like, it's just not fair. So good job, Mom. Okay, now actually to why we're here, which is Joy's book. I told Joy, and I mean this in total sincerity, I love this book. I just love this book. And these are hard books to write. These books that are trying to be prescriptive, that are trying to provide advice, because so often they just become so formulaic, and you're just kind of like, okay, whatever, here's the formula, do this. Do that. That is not this book. This book is partly an inspirational guide. It is partly a set of prescriptions. It is a lot of a memoir. And it is weaving through these stories, these incredible stories. She's a fantastic storyteller. These stories from her own life that explain how she found her own way through some youthful and ill-considered decisions, right? Personal tragedy, realities of financial pressures and stresses, responsibilities of raising these 3 kids alone, medical crises that befell her family, and just the general pressures of modern society and modern life. And in addition to all that, and to be so very revealing about her own life, she includes really wonderful and compelling stories of other women who have experienced being single parents for a variety of different reasons and in a variety of different circumstances that add and amplify this compelling story of Joyce. So that's the kind of totality of this book and why it is really special. You've just done such an amazing, and this is our first book. So congratulations, and thank you for it. Thank you so much for it. No, we really, I really hope you all will read it for all of those reasons. So I just want to start, Joy, by asking you this. So Wes wrote the foreword. And in that foreword, he says that, he said that as he was traveling around promoting his books and telling the story of his own upbringing, people would always want to know about you. They would always say, wait, how did your mom do that? Wait, what's the deal with your mom? Tell us the story of your mom. So obviously this is your story. So can you tell us how you got to the point where you decided you really were going to do it? And then what is it like to really finally put it all on paper?
Wow. Well, can I start with...
You can start anywhere you want. This is your event.
I am just so overwhelmed. I think one of the things I hope will come out of the book as you read it is the importance of support and love, and the metaphor I use throughout the book is that of a lioness. Lionesses are the only animals that live in prides, and they take care of each other. They take care of the cubs. They are the ones who go out and hunt the food, and the lion does whatever he does. But it's the lioness who really runs the show.
Got that, Wes?
It's true. It is true.
And so that's why I use that particular metaphor. And being in this room right now, starting right here with Lissa, and Lissa is one of the people who have been a part of our lives. I mean, I met her through Wes because she was on the committee that selected him for the Rhodes Scholar, which changed the trajectory of his life. There's a young man here who used to pick up my mail when he was like 2 or 3 or whatever when I was traveling. When my neighbor is here. Of course, my girlfriends from college, they're here. I mean,
They're in the book.
And oh yeah, they're in the book.
You know that, right?
All the secrets are in the book. And of course my kids. And people that I've worked with over the years, from Connecticut, from DC, from Baltimore. So this is my pride. And I thank you all so much for being here. I mean, you can write a book, but if you don't have anything to write about, then you don't have a book. So thank you. Thank you. I wanted this to be a love letter to single moms, because there's so much, like, folks dealing, all the time, this is the reason America is failing because of the single mom, blah, blah, blah. When in fact, as Wes so beautifully says in the foreword, single moms are not America's burden. It's America's backbone. You have single moms who have, during each war, before women were allowed to go into combat, it were single moms who kept the family going while the men went off to war. Single moms have always been there, but somehow we're spoiling America or something. I don't know. So it is a love letter, but it's also a call to action, because if we do not support single moms and single parent families the way we should in terms of our policy, then we will never find the promise of America. Mm. So, that's why I wrote the book, and hoping those are the messages, that it will start a conversation. Mm-hmm. That if you see a single mom who needs some help, let it help. If you see policies, fight for equal pay. These are the things that will keep families going.
Mm-hmm. And but in terms of the personal part of this book, how hard was it to, it seems like you had thought about a lot of this for a long time, because there's a lot of wisdom in this book, but it's very revealing, and you had to relive things, I imagine. Was that hard to do, or was it cathartic? Maybe both.
It was hard. It was, well, a lot of it, because it wasn't just sort of my story. Mm-hmm. I had to check in with the kids.
Right. Yeah.
I checked in with my friends, mm-hmm. because there's some stories, is it okay?
Yeah, sure.
And once they gave me permission to do that, then I had to give myself permission to really dig deep and be honest and authentic. Mm-hmm. And, some of the things I was like, oh, do I really want to put that out there? But if I was going to be authentic, I had to. I
think it's the hardest thing to write a book in the first person like this. And, you came from a very loving, very stable family. And you begin the book in a really interesting way. You talk about how, because of that, you always saw as a kid, you have a very funny anecdote, which I'll let people read, but you saw your parents as a team.
Yes.
And so your concept of parenthood was that you were going to be part of a team.
Yep.
That was your expectation.
Absolutely. It never crossed my mind that I would ever be a single parent.
Right.
I got married not far from here, actually, and I thought I would be there forever. Most of the people I knew were married, and so I just never saw myself as a single parent, and so I ended up being a single parent 3 times.
Right. 2 by choice and 1 totally not by choice.
Right.
Right. and you had a lot going for you. You were college educated. You had several degrees. You had some of your support system right here from AU. Some of them, right? And
there he goes.
And you had a lot that is foundational. And at the same time, then you had this horrible, unforeseen tragedy of losing your second husband, Wes and Shawnee's dad. And suddenly you had to be the double parent. You had to do two roles, be two parents for three little kids. And you had to overcome your own grief. And life seemed pretty unfair to the point where you even lost your faith in God for a while.
I did. I tried to make a deal with God. I would stop smoking if he let my husband live. And since he didn't do that, I said, okay, I can't go to church anymore. But it took a good 2 years before I sort of reclaimed my faith. Part of it was going back to New York and being surrounded again by my dad, who was a minister, and my mom, who would have loved to have been here. She's 91 now, and still very much. I call her my original Linus, and so the finding and reclaiming that faith in many ways became part of who the kids are. And I had to do that to allow them to get that base that I know that eventually would lift me up. So I think a lot of what parenting is and what parenting does is if you think about your kids and what they need, the rest sort of comes along.
Well, that I don't want to give too much of the book away, but there's a really poignant moment in the book towards the beginning where you're describing how you're really having trouble overcoming the grief of losing the man who really was the love of your life, and it's hard, and you're frazzled, and you're unhappy, and your kids need you, and you finally are going through your closet, and his suits and things are still there, and you feel his presence, but at the same time, that moment allows you to see that you need to be ready to be there for your kids and that you need to move back to New York. And one of the pieces of advice you give in the book is you have to know when to let go, and you have to have permission to give yourself permission. Exactly. And to be compassionate toward yourself. And so you do move back to New York, but you had to give some things up, notions about yourself, I guess, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think when you're sort of on your own and you can do whatever you want to do, and then all of a sudden, got to go back home and live under these are their rules, and so you're afraid. I think that's sort of, we've been asked, sort of what is the one sort of thread throughout. There are 15 stories of other women throughout the book. So what was sort of the thread that kept us together and that sort of kept us all sort of going? And I think it. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. And I think it was fear. This initial fear. Am I enough? Can I do enough? Can I surround my kids with enough love and support when I have to do all these other things? And that was the one reoccurring theme, throughout all the stories. And faith was the sort of the ingredient, that bubbled up. I have the 7 pillars, and they all sort of can function separately, but their strength is the blending and braiding of all of them. And so that was one of the things that again that I hope will come out.
I want to come back to the pillars in a sec, but Wes, I want to ask you a question. Your mom just mentioned that in the foreword, I was going to ask you about this. You do talk about single. It upsets you that our country views single mothers as as burdens and not as the backbone of families. And you have an amazing line in there where you say, your mom sacrificed everything for you and your sisters. And you say, I watched her need, but never want. And I want to hear from you what it is about this stigma of single mothers that's just so, unpleasant, unnerving, upsetting, whatever the word would be.
It's I think one of the things that really bothers me about it is it's hurtful, it's inaccurate, and it's being done for a reason that has nothing but nefarious intentions behind it. I think about oftentimes this idea of what it means to have family values, and where the core family value is an idea of being a protector to those who you have within your sphere, and oftentimes, the thing when I think about this idea of single moms and single dads and this argument that well, they just have their hands out for more, people having babies so they can receive more resources, all this kind of thing. The challenge of it is, from a purely practical perspective, think about what our society would be like had it not been for these single parents. Just from a purely practical perspective, think about the weight that would happen on everything from the foster care system and all these other systems had we not had these men and women who are stepping up in remarkable ways. And in many ways that many of them that they were not prepared for, didn't ask for, but this becomes their reality. And also, I think it also goes back to this idea of what do we mean by family in the first place? Mm-hmm. Where when people talk about some of the challenges that we have within so many communities, where is it all about the breakdown of the family? And in many ways, it's about the breakdown of the definition of family. It's the breakdown on how we define that in the first place. Who we bring into our area, who we bring into our environments. And actually, I think one of the things that I really took from the power of this story, personally, just as a parent, was this idea that not only do I feel like we were led by a heroic woman, and I think I say between both Shani and Nikki, and myself, the greatest gift that God gave us, the greatest way that God told us that He loved us, was a gift that we didn't ask for, but it was the day that He asked Joy Moore to give birth to us. The greatest gift He could have given us. But I also know that there was no way she could have done it alone. That laced throughout this book and laced throughout both her story and the story of all these other people, all these other women who she features, is the fact that there's not one of them who could have done it on their own. That at crucial junctures, at crucial moments, that people were there even when they weren't asked to be. But they were there because they needed to be. And no one ever tried to ever come in and replace my father. But what they tried to make sure is that the things and the supports that we collectively needed, that we got. And so why it is so hurtful when I hear people make these digs and these arguments about single parents, it's not only a lack of appreciation and understanding of who and what we're talking about. It's a lack of appreciation of who and what single parents have contributed to our society ever since the beginning of our society. And that we wouldn't be who we are had it not been for people who are willing to step up in ways that they knew were necessary.
Well, and one of the things your mom says, Joy, that you say is you have to be willing to share your child or your children. And, that's, most people don't think like that. And maybe some of it's born of necessity, but it allowed Wes to have the mentors he had. It allowed Shani and Nikki to have mentors that they needed. It allowed people to help with things at various times, right? So, but that is hard for people, I think, right?
It is. And I think you have to be very thoughtful about how you do it, because you don't want to just sort of throw them out there and, and say, fend for yourself. But with proper vetting and, sort of, and when it comes to sort of the values section, if you people that you allow in the lives of your kids have to share your values. If someone is like cursing and or doing drugs or drinking or what, if that's not who you are, you don't want to sort of pass that on to your kids. You have your own stuff that you're gonna have to deal with, and so you don't necessarily want to deal with other folks' stuff.
Right.
I think that whole sort of mentorship, it's so important. Some of the things that people have been able to provide and share, with the kids. And they have to, it's not money. It's the experiences and stories. And, those are the things that last. And, I think I have all throughout the book lots of quotes, because I figure single moms don't have a whole lot of time sometimes to do so. Hang on to a quote if you need it. And one of them is that for Martin Luther King, who says, kids need your presence and not your presence. And so that is what, that I'm hoping, that will come through.
It so comes through. And speaking of presence, not presence, I think one of the things that makes this book so powerful and so resonant is that you don't sugarcoat anything. Like, as you probably know from my introduction, her children aren't perfect angels now. What I didn't say is that they weren't always. She herself was, by her own definition and measure in this book, was not always a perfect mother, right? Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing. She outlines the pillars of being present, and I'll mention them: the presence of mind, heart, faith, courage, resources, connectedness, and values. But what's interesting about the way you present this is that these were all hard-earned for you. These were not obvious. They weren't just things you could look in a crystal ball and go, oh, okay, I get it now. I just got to do this. They were hard-earned. And it was a process of discovery, and it took time.
It is. And, I think one of the things that I really fought against is that being sort of considered the expert on this. I have experts in the book talking. I was not an expert. I was an experimenter. Some things worked, some things didn't, and thank God they gave me the space to, fix it when I got it wrong. And, my kids became partners in a way, but still I was their parent. When we talk, there's a lot of talk about, in the book, about whether or not you're a friend versus a parent. You cannot be a friend. We're friends now. We're really good friends now. That was not always the case.
Well, this gets no, Cam, and this gets. I was telling Shani and Nikki there. I was going to ask you about something that I heard you say once, and it's right on this very topic. And I think part of what comes through in the book too is that it's these decisions you have to make as a single parent facing a lot of uncertainty and different kinds of. There's not an obvious outcome to the decisions you make, right? I mean, you don't know for sure that you're making the right decision. So you have to kind of trust yourself. You have to just do the vetting and then kind of prayer and a hope and a wing and whatever else. And so I wanted to ask both of you this. You had to make a decision about Wes early on when he was in his early teens, and he was not behaving well. He was not applying himself at school. He was potentially heading down the very wrong path. Oh, yeah. And Wes, you describe in the other Wes Moore, the moment that your mother sends you off to Valley Forge Military Academy at age 12, 13. And it's sort of to straighten you out. And you are not happy about it. And in the months after you get there, you try to run away from the school a bunch of times. And Joy, you tell your version of this in this section, The Power of Courage. And you describe your rationale and the intense emotions around it. And it brought me back to when we had the panel for the other Wes Moore here. And someone in the audience got up and asked Joy, wait, how did you do that? You sent your 13-year-old kid off to this boot camp, military, hardcore place. Wasn't that hard? And I'll never forget your answer. I don't know. I never will forget this. It had such a profound effect on me. And here's what you said. You said, it was the hardest decision I ever made in my life. But I knew that my job was not to be Wes. I knew that my job was to be Wes's mom, not to be his best friend. Now we're best friends. That's what you said then, and it's what you just said now. And it's such an important thing to trust yourself to make that decision and to have the wherewithal, though, right? Because you didn't know how it was going to work out. And there were other decisions. You sent Nikki to her dad, her birth dad, when you hadn't been in touch for a long time, and it didn't go exactly as planned, right?
No.
But you had to trust that it was all going to work out.
Exactly. And because she was able to see, perhaps why I was so hesitant all along, she became then part of the decision,
right,
to do something else.
So you felt you had ownership in it too at that point. Yeah. I want to invite everybody to start making your way to the microphones if you have questions. I do not want to dominate this entire time. So I'm going to ask a few more until people get up there. I'll ask one. Wes, I want to ask you a question quickly. So you decide to join the military, and if you've read the work, you know about this. He decides to join the military. He's working at Deutsche Bank in London. He's got a pretty good life. Yeah, but duty calls, literally, and you join the army, and you are deployed to Afghanistan, to the mountains of Kandahar, to be in combat. And your grandfather, Joy's father, who, as she said, was a minister, he gives you a Bible to take with you, and your mom writes about this in her book. And he inscribes it. Tell us what he inscribed in it. You carried that Bible with you in the mountains of Kandahar under your Kevlar vest. I want you to tell us what he inscribed in it. I want to know where the Bible is now. And I want to know more about your grandpa, who your mom does talk about quite a bit in the book. It just is such an inspiration to all of you.
Yes. My grandfather is an absolute hero to me. He was actually the first one in our family born in this country. He was born in South Carolina. And his father, my great-grandfather, was a minister. And I guess he caused a little bit too much trouble, because when my grandfather was just a toddler, they started receiving death threats from the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan ran my family out of South Carolina and ran them out of this country. And so they then went back to Jamaica, where they are originally from. And the majority of my family then vowed never to come back to this country, with the exception of my grandfather, who always vowed that he would, because he considered this place not just his birth home, but he considered this place his home. And when my dad died, and my grandfather was a minister in the South Bronx, the first black minister in the history of the Dutch Reformed Church. And I always say, this is a church that held a Bible in one hand and justified apartheid on their lips. And my grandmother was a school teacher, a public school teacher in the South Bronx. And their house was really barely big enough for them. But when my mom called, they figured out a way to make it big enough for all of us. And so when I got older, and then I was in the military getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan, we were about a week out from heading out with my unit. I was with the 82nd Airborne Division. And we went to go see them in the Bronx, and they gave him one of those little, the little green pocket Bibles. And inside the front of it, in very frail writing, because I think at that point he was 88 when I deployed, he wrote, "Have faith, not fear. Love Papa Jim and Mama Win." And I kept that Bible with me throughout my entire deployment. As Liz was saying, I mean, every time we would go out, I would stick that Bible. We had a little pocket inside of our flak vest. So every time you go out, you have your Kevlar, you have your flak vest, you have your weapons, everything else. And so every time that you go out outside of the wire, I kept this little Bible right inside of my flak vest. And I remember before every single mission, I would say to myself, have faith, not fear. Have faith, not fear. Have faith, not fear. Because you're in a pretty fearful place. And in a place, to be honest, where for so many things that happened and so many things you saw, there was no preparation for it. You could prepare all you want. If you just happen to be the unlucky soul sitting in the wrong seat, there's nothing you can do. And so the only thing, the most important piece of equipment that you had was your faith. The most important piece of training that you had was your faith. And the Bible still to this day is in my office. They're still the same words that I use whenever there are challenging situations or complicated decisions, or things or places that you go in that you know might not feel like the most comfortable. But I just feel like his words and the words of have faith, not fear, is really what guides us, because I've come to understand that decisions that are led by faith are always your best. Decisions that are led by fear are oftentimes your worst. And how we then think about that, reflect it, and then understand where our truest joy comes from really helps to decide the best places that we end up in.
If I may just read a small part just to the... Oh, I can do it, but thank you. Just a little addendum to what Wes just said from the book. When I look now at the Bible with the shaky inscription, I am reminded of my intense fear when I heard the proposal of now General Mike Fenzel. But because of faith, I was able to put aside my anxiety and fear and instead support Wes's decision to join the fight. Because I decided not to become a barrier of tears or anger at his decision, I now see what God's plan was all along. Wes, now a captain, following a battlefield promotion, stood shoulder to shoulder with his troops in the battlefield and in rooms where the United States was trying to build bridges and reconciliation between the rebels and the government. He learned how to lead his troops with strength and compassion. He set clear objectives and devised strategies to achieve them. These are all qualities he now employs as the CEO of New York's largest foundation devoted to eliminating poverty, the Robin Hood Foundation. This was the real fight he was being prepared for and was meant to have.
And another, just a small addendum. Your grandfather died shortly after you were deployed, and you were able to talk to him when he was in the hospital by phone. They put the phone up, and you have to read to know what happened. But it's a quite a moving moment in the book. Ma'am, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Wes.
Can you speak into the mic?
The question is sort of a broader base one, as opposed, well, it's a two-part question, but one is broader and one is more personal. I know that you spent a lot of time in education, particularly dealing with early childhood education and working in policy. Joy. And so my question is, what did you learn from the experiences in the policy-making sort of wonkish world, and at the same time watching your own grandchildren? What was it? What's the takeaway from those experiences that perhaps contributed to this book in some way? Now, I know that's a really broad question, but maybe there's one takeaway from that was part of your aha moment that helped with the 7 pillars.
Thank you. I think if I had to sort of pick one takeaway in terms of policy and practice, it would be the importance of grade level reading and making sure that all kids have the ability to the early childhood experiences. Those things I watch my kids now. My 7-year-old I mean, my granddaughter is reading stuff that I read in junior high school. That's because her parents and, all her environment around her has stressed education. And now Jamie's talking about, when we were earlier today, we were talking, can we play the ad game? Adding numbers, making everything around them a learning experience. So I think that if we can pay more attention to and invest in those things that will prepare kids early on, then they can sort of take it and run with it.
To be very honest, I don't even know why a conversation around early childhood education and universal pre-K and universal 3K is even a conversation. I'm being very serious. Like, I don't know why this is even a debatable item. The idea that our children are getting educated and are meeting their first teachers before they walk into a kindergarten classroom. And if you look at the dynamics that we have within our society that are so complicated, and you look at the reason why we have this gap in reading levels, the reason why we have this gap for so many students, you can really break it down to three core reasons, right? One is chronic absence. So for the fact that we have children who are missing 30% or more of the school year for a variety of different options, and there are things we can do about that. The second thing is summer learning loss. The fact that you have kids who, if they're not having educational experiences during the summer, it's going to take them until November to catch up to where they left off in June, which continues to exacerbate the gap that exists between students. And the third reason is kids who are entering school unprepared. Kids who are entering school not knowing letters and numbers and colors and that type of thing. And if you talk to teachers and you say, what is it that you need? Oftentimes they'll say a classroom full of kids ready to learn and ready to go. Because if I teach too slow, I'll completely bore the kids that are ready. If I teach too fast, I'll lose the kids that still need additional levels of support. And I mean, my mom brought it up once where I was talking about the story that I love with our kids, where we used to read. I used to read to my wife's stomach when she was pregnant.
It looked weird, but it worked.
It looked so crazy. It looked so crazy. But in little books, and sometimes it'd be like kids' books, and sometimes it would be The Economist, like whatever I was interested in or whatever. But it's like, but just it's the idea of just reading, hearing words, and my wife, yeah, and my wife always shared a story, and I love because when our daughter was first born, she came out, just like that. It was simple, actually. I mean, it was actually pretty easy. I don't know what you all are complaining about. Birth is actually pretty easy. So she came out. And it's amazing because when she first came out, she was actually, and to know me as the lover, she's actually first just like looking around, like what is going on? And then the doctor starts doing all the things doctors do, like the poking of the feet and the sticking the thing in the mouth and pulling all the stuff out. And then she starts wailing, crying. And they bring her over to the incubator, which I say is kind of like, it's like a hot plate for restaurants. Like it's like just like heat, and they put the baby on there. So they put the baby in the incubator, and she's still crying. And then I go over to her, and I start talking to her, and just welcoming her and saying, "We're so happy to see you, and we love you, and hello Mia." And she stops crying. I am convinced, and Dawn points out, I'm convinced that the reason that she stopped crying at that moment is at a moment where everything is just chaos, right? She's stretching out for the first time. She's seeing lights for the first time. People are touching her and prodding her and sticking things in her mouth and all this for the first time. And she's freaking out that out of nowhere, she hears something familiar. And it gives her peace. And it lets her know it's going to be okay. And the idea that we collectively, and going back, and I love the question and adore you, thank you, because the idea that from a policy perspective, that we even have to debate the virtue of providing assets and resources to our youngest and our most vulnerable, to be honest, says more about us than anything else. So.
Very well said. Sir, do you have a question?
Yes. Is this a live mic?
Oh.
Okay. My name is Ty Harris. I won't be long. I've known Joy and her family for a while, so I won't get into all of those details. But
Oh, come on.
I have always,
Half a century.
I have always been envious of the sisterhood that Joy is a part of, and what I'd like to know from Joy is, what did she want her kids to learn from that sisterhood and your affiliation with it? And I'd like to ask Wes, what did he think he did learn from that affiliation? Thank you.
Uncle Ty. Wow. Well, you got to read the book. There's a whole chapter.
Good answer.
There's a whole chapter. What I think they and I am going to turn this over to Wes, because what they learned by observing. You know, kids, you can tell them anything, and they may hear the words, but when they really learn is when they watch. You guys were there all the time in their lives. You know, sometimes talking to you more than talking to me. But that's okay, because I like your values.
I'm not in the sisterhood.
Well, we let a couple of y'all in, okay?
Okay.
But I think a lot of times society again, will pit women against each other. And we have to be strong enough to resist that and really take from those relationships, those caring relationships. A lot of times, if I'm tired, let me go back to the reading piece. If I'm tired, I knew someone else could read to my kids that night. That's the kind of support that, that the sisterhood, provided, and that we can all do, and while we're fighting for the policy stuff, we can do things individually. And that's what sisterhood, to me, was all about.
And I think, honestly, for me, and I think about, looking out and seeing, Aunt Mary, and I'm seeing Aunt Linda, and Aunt Helen, and so it's like, and Aunt Pam. So it's like, I think what it gave to me was it gave me an idea of what I wanted. Because it's not lost on me when I look at the relationship that my mom has with all of my aunts. And one thing, and say, I don't even put like aunts in air quotes, because like these are like my aunts. Mm-hmm. They're who I came up with. And, and I think, again, we talk about this idea of the recreation of family, where I think we are amazingly limited when we talk about family purely as a DNA structure, right? And then I think about Dawn, where I think about one of the most attractive thing of the many attractive things about that woman over there was the fact that she had the exact same thing. Her friend Tanya, who has been in her life ever since they were in high school, who, by the way, whose daughter is here right now as a freshman at Georgetown. Yeah, she's right there. Her friends Lois and Dia and Erica and Tony, like she has the exact same thing. This collection of beautiful, strong women who will do anything for each other, who will defend each other to the T. I mean, I remember to the point when I was trying to date Dawn, and like I'm trying to, they were coming out very quickly. They're coming out to England. And I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm like, oh, maybe we can hang out, da da da. She's like, okay, great. I'm gonna bring my friends. I'm like, why do you need to bring your friends for? But she's gonna bring her friends. They were always going to steer her straight. They were always going to be there and be her fiercest defenders. And that's still the case to this day. So, I mean, I think what it really meant for me, and seeing y'all two together, I think what it really meant for me was it gave me an example of exactly what I was looking for when I thought about the partner that I wanted to spend my life with and the partner that I wanted to be the mother of my children.
Shared values.
And she has a piece of all of them, too. She is that beautiful.
Go ahead.
Yes. I want to pick up on your remark, Joy, about your friends were there when you needed them, and when maybe you didn't want people, that you were advising us to step up and just keep stepping up. I'm in a situation a little bit like that, and we've all probably encountered this at one time or another. There is a single mom. Maybe she could use some help. I've been a mom. I needed all the help I could get, and I wasn't a single mom. But there's a wall, you know. And if you have any tips, and maybe I'll find them in the book, but the reason I came tonight was to know a little bit more about how you say, I go to her and I say, I'm here to help. I really am here to help. Let me know what I can do for you.
Yeah, there's a fear, I think of accepting help, of asking for help. The sort of just being consistent. One of the things that that we say, I've said it, say in different ways throughout the book, is that kids have to know that you care before they care what you know. And Susan Taylor, one of the other people I talked to, I mean, she said it took a long time for her daughter to really believe that she cared about her day. It takes time, so that once that trust is established, I think then it becomes a matter of being able to accept the help that you obviously are so willing and graciously to give her.
Yeah, great, good advice. Thank you.
Can I just jump in with one quick question? So you said there are 15 stories and this is ranged. You can read about the single mother of Joaquin and Julian Castro. You can read about, I think her name was Pam Warner, who is the mother of Theo Huxtable, the actor who played Theo Huxtable in The Cosby Show. And then there are people you haven't, might not have heard of. Some of them I think you knew, but some of them you discovered in this process. How did you find them, and how did you decide on them?
Well, I mean, a lot of them I knew from my work with the Casey Foundation. Rosie Castro, I knew because she was a community organizer in one of the communities that I worked in. When I sort of described what kind of mom or story I was looking for, friends said, "Oh, I know so-and-so." And would then connect me with that person. Some people I read about and said, "Oh, wow, okay, this is someone I want to know. This is a story that I want to share."
And it's wonderful because they all have different circumstances and different challenges, different needs, getting to your point. And so I think you'll find that very, very helpful to read about all of them as well as Joy's story. So we're going to alternate. So we'll go over here.
I've been thinking about some memories that will always be with me and Linda. Every time I drive past Fort Lincoln Cemetery, I think about the day we said farewell to your father. I also think about some very precious conversations with your mother and your father. My question is, what's the most seminal thing they taught you and that you shared?
Wait, you're a professional journalist. Is that got an advantage here? Bernard Shaw.
If anyone who hasn't been around for the past 50 or so years, this is Bernie Shaw, who is a neighbor and lifelong friend. I went to school with his wife Linda. She's the Aunt Linda you'll read about in the book, and he's the Uncle Bernie you will read about in the book.
You have to answer the question. Oh, it's to Wes.
Oh, it's a really good question. Not surprised. I think the I feel like there's two really important lessons that I think I've taken from them. And I have to say I was thinking about something yesterday because we were talking about my dad, and And he died when I was about 4 years old. And I was talking about the fact that still, even to this day, I still feel cheated. I feel like it's unfair. And part of the reason I feel so cheated and I feel like it is so unfair is because I know from my mom and I know from my sister and I know from all of you what a good man he was. And that makes me feel that much more cheated. I feel like even though I did not have a chance to grow up with him in that way in the physical sense, I still feel like to this day he still guides me. I feel like still to this day he still talks to me. I still feel like there is no way that I have had the luck that I've had in my life without someone up there who's calling in some favors. I really do believe that. And I think that one of the lessons that he also showed me was first the importance of the people who you surround yourself with, who your friends are, who you choose as your spouse, because I think that without even realizing it, and maybe he did, without even realizing it, by asking my mom to marry him, by asking her to be the mother of his children, in some ways he was saying that even if I'm not here, I know my kids are going to have a fighting chance. By the people that you choose to be around and the people who you choose to bring into your orbit and bring into your atmosphere. I think the other thing, though, that the important lesson that I think I learned both from her and from him is knowing when patience is a virtue and knowing when patience is a detriment. And it's just this idea that it's important to be patient. It's important not to be erratic. It's important to be thoughtful. It's also important to know that you don't have forever. And it's important to know that all these things that people talk about, well, I'll do it this time, or I'll do it that time, I'll do it next week, I'll do it next year, whatever like that. The question becomes, who promised you that? And I think that both from my mom's actions and this pushing and encouraging of love, and also by his examples, I think he continues to push out and stress out to me the importance of understanding which type of patience you're dealing with. And that's actually one of the more important lessons you're going to be able to learn.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Earl Taylor. I had the great opportunity to work with Joy at the Annie Casey Foundation, and I currently work at Hobson's. And you were just the guest speaker for our Hobson's Summer Institute, and we chose your book as a book club. So we read books. We were an education technology company, and we read books to expand our thinking beyond just technology. And so we were discussing your book yesterday, and I have a question for each of you. First, you, Wes. As we were reading your book, and that moment when you were in military school, and the whole run into the forest and then coming back. I love how that story comes full circle too. And then you decide to stay, but there's this piece where you're like, you're there, and then you're a sergeant. There's a gap, right? And what we were digging into is what changed. What was the epiphany that woke you up and had you be able to see a different path and choose it, right? Because in looking at the book, and it's about the parallel tracks and how they went one way or the other, I would say that's the moment yours really did change. So we were trying to get inside of what changed. So first for you, and then.
That's right, and you're right. As my mom alluded to, military school wasn't my choice.
You were drafted.
Yeah, I was drafted at 13. At 13, I thought there was laws against it, but hey, Not in my house, I guess. And in fact, actually, speaking of Uncle Bernie, I know that Uncle Bernie was one of the only people that my mom knew who was in the military, and actually had conferred with Uncle Bernie for, I think this is a good idea, but what do you think? And because she didn't have any experience with it, and Uncle Bernie then helped to tell her this is a good idea, so I kind of blame him as well. But and I did, and in the first 4 days, I ran away 5 times because they had these big black gates, and they would always tell us, if you don't like it here, you can go home anytime you want. And so I would just take them up on their offer without realizing that it wasn't an offer. And it's funny because there is that gap, because of the way I tried to write the other Wes Moore was in almost like years, because that was kind of that as I was putting it together, as I was putting it even on the whiteboard, that's what started making sense to me. And there were certain years that we just had to eliminate just for space reasons, and kind of some of those middle parts was one of them. But I think one of the things that happened to me, it was really kind of twofold. One is I realized that they weren't letting me back home. And so I didn't really have much of a choice in the like she wasn't budging, they weren't budging. So I was like, all right, well, let me just at least give this a shot. And, but I think the other thing was I started to feel like I wasn't alone, because I think that was one of the things that was one of the emotions that really hit me at that moment at 13, was I just felt very alone. Like I felt like people weren't listening to me. They're not hearing me. I felt like decisions were being made for me without asking me. You know, I felt like it was like, you know, I was the subject of conversations, but never part of conversations. Mm-hmm. And that was really hurtful. Where I always say, even some of our old teachers who I know now, where I say, you know, we could have actually answered a lot of this stuff if y'all would have actually asked me. And I could have told you what was going on and why I was having challenges and what was going on in my life and why I was, I think, it's in real pain at that moment. And then also I found myself really rallied around and supported by people who then repeatedly were showing me, helping me to understand not just the importance of mentorship in the traditional sense, but also the importance of my own history. That, I think, was also the moment that I really started getting into history, culture, African American history. And I started to realize that there was nothing in my life that I should ever be ashamed of, that there was nothing in my life, that everything was because of the work and the sacrifice that people had made before. And I understood that I now started feeling like I was actually part of something bigger, that I was part of a larger continuum, and that there were people who were actively working every morning for the hope of me. And that actually did mean something. And so I think that period, that moment in between, from like running away to now then being a sergeant in charge of cadets, was I started to feel like I was actually part of something meaningful and something where I was integral. And that's one of the reasons why I think in so much of what we do, particularly with kids, if we can introduce leadership, history, and an understanding of importance in their life, then that can make a significant difference in where they go. Because truthfully, for many kids that go one way or another way, there's a yearning for connection, involvement, responsibility. And so the question then becomes, who's going to get to them first? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just the only thing I want to add to that is the sort of the allowing kids to make choices, helping them and guiding them to make choices. In Wes's case, it was, okay, no, you're not going to go after your 5 times. You're not going to leave this place, but you've got to give yourself a chance. And if you do well, at the end of the year, you have a choice. You can either come back home or you can continue there, at Valley Forge. And once, I think so, he worked really hard to do well, and probably at first so he could come home. But then he realized that he could do well, that he could do the work, that he enjoyed being a leader as opposed to a follower. He no longer had to be the class clown, because he was around folks who really believed in him, who, as he says, saw the promise in him. And so helping kids make choices, wise choices when they're young, helps them make bigger choices, as they grow up.
And did you have a question?
Yeah,
for
so
Joy
I had a
also?
question for you, Joy. So the subtext, I got a question. So the subtext of your book, and I'm hearing a little bit in what Wes was saying, of being there when you're not there. What's the key to that, right? Because there are times now when I hear my father, boy, right, and then I almost look around sometimes because it's right there. So what's the element, as you've explored this? What's the element of that showing up so that at the moments when they need us, we are there, even if we aren't physically?
Absolutely, that's it. Your daddy had it right. It's just, I will answer your question, but we went to the African American Museum today. One of the pieces in there was a pillar case, I guess, that is embroidered, and with the story of this woman whose child was taken away from her and sold, but she wanted her child to have a piece of her to take with her to wherever she went. Feathers. I mean, they talked about all kinds of, feathers and, lock of hair and this was the essence of wanting to be with that child, even though she could not be physically with that child. We no longer have to do, the feathers and the lock of hair, but we can leave those values. We can every day instill those things that are important to the maturation of your child, so that when you're 20, 30, 40, that I think one of the sort of my North Star in terms of raising the kids was looking at a particular behavior at 5, or let's say, or 5 or 6, whatever the case may be, and say, okay, this is appropriate for now, and it probably will go away. But if you see a particular behavior that you don't want to see at 30, then you got to jump on it right then and there, because it will come back. So and that's that little voice. That's that thing that people will hear. When they're 20 or they're 30 and beyond.
Not to inject a political note, but I can't help myself. It really does. Everything you're saying just makes you realize, apart from the obvious, enormous tragedy of separating these kids at the border, the consequences of just the very basic things that you're talking about. So, incredible words of wisdom and just, well, anyway, it's unspeakable, but go ahead.
Well, no, I was just, because I'm not getting political either, but what's going to happen down the road is that we're going to start blaming these kids for stuff that because they've been so traumatized. They say, these bad kids. No, we did it. We're doing it to them right now. And it is a crime. It is a sin. And we should not be doing it.
Correct. Amen. We are unfortunately almost out of time. Ma'am, you have a question. You are going to get the last question. I have about 1,000 more questions, which I'm not going to ask because we don't have time. But ma'am, you have the final word here.
Okay. Well, maybe my question will be one that will be a good segue into the rest of the evening and the rest of our lives after we read the book. I'm thinking about the strength of connections that are delineated in your pillars. And I wondered if you would be able to tell, in your memory of conversing with the single mothers, how the difference between hearing and listening kind of was a theme, for you and for them. And also, even if you can't hit this, but something that we can be thinking about for ourselves, how the notion of not thinking of ourselves, I'm saying ourselves, as single mothers, but thinking of themselves and yourself as mothers of the world, how that came across as you reflected on your story and their stories. Hearing and listening, and then mothers, not just defined by single.
See, this is Auntie Pam, who asks the most complicated questions. Has always asked it.
Hearing, listening.
We are our group is celebrating our 50th anniversary this year.
Yeah.
We met on the campus of American University.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, this time
50 years
exactly
ago.
50 years
this
ago.
Season. Yeah.
So yeah, Pam, let me
Hearing,
stop.
listening. Hearing, listening versus, yeah.
I think it's very easy to sort of hear, but it's so, when you're in the midst of a crisis or your own sort of anxiety, listening is so much more difficult. And that, I think, is sort of the patience that, as a friend, you have to you have to give the patience, the time for people to really listen, to you. I mean, I can always hear. I mean, you hear the clutter and all the things that are going up, but really listening, and having that ability to listen, I think is a skill that you have to develop, and it's developed in trust. As the second part of your question
Was if you were able to pick up, as you reflected on your story and with the mothers or the single mothers, if you were able to identify with yourselves as mothers in the world,
absolutely.
and if that came across as a cross-cutting theme as you evolved with your reflections.
I've at the sort of the end of this journey of research and stuff, I really do think that the term single mother is a misnomer, because we cannot do it alone. And I mean, if you look at the numbers, there's 14 million families that are headed by women and kids. I think 18 million kids with kids under the age of 18.
Yeah.
If we were a nation, we'd be bigger than Hong Kong. We'd be bigger than Jamaica. There's political power if we were to really coalesce around those issues that are important to mothers, not just single moms. And I think if we stop, first of all, if we stop with the bashing of single mothers and look at motherhood and parenthood, because dads are in there too. I mean, there's one of the fastest growing rate of single dads, and they're also so very cute, when they are in the strollers and they bring them. And we need to support them. So let's just stop with the labels and stuff. If we can treat each other as just parents, trying to bring in kids that are going to benefit us as a nation, we'd be so much better off.
Can I just, I just want to end with one thought, which is that over in our religion section, we better have, a really wonderful little book that some of you may have read by a French priest. It's called The Return of the Prodigal Son. Henri Nouwen is the author. And he talks in the book about the discipline of gratitude. I know you both talk a lot about being grateful for your friends, your pride, your family. And I just want to say how grateful we are for your book, for the fact that you had the courage to write it. Wes, Shawnee and Nikki for being there for your mom and everybody here. What a gift it is to all of us. And thank you so much for honoring us by coming tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you.